Right, so we're going to do something slightly different today. We're going to do a quick Mesoamerican themed book review. So these are some books about the Aztec Empire, the conquest of the Aztec Empire, and Aztec history and culture. Um, and there's a few other books about Mesoamerican things, which is sort of the general region that includes Mexico and the Mayan areas, which is a very distinct culture. And some of these other books are also about more generally America before the conquest. Anyway, let's go through. Step number one, book number one, Flower Song and Dance by this guy, David Bowles. Um, it's fine. It's a collection of Aztec poetry. Uh, there are some that I quite like. It doesn't give you much context, and it's not actually recommended by me. Number two, Bernal Diaz, The Conquest of New Spain. This one, on the other hand, is an absolute must. You have to read it if you're interested in this period of history. Bernal Diaz was one of the men who marched with Cortes. So this is a first-hand account of the conquest, and he was actually involved in Grijalva's expedition to Mexico before, so he was a little bit more familiar with the area. He was a common man. He didn't consider himself very eloquent or a good writer. So it took quite a bit of convincing to get him to put pen to paper. In fact, what finally caused him to do this is that he thought the story was misrepresented by others, including the official biographer Gomera, who he wrote hilariously. He says of Gomera, he spoke the truth neither at the beginning, nor in the middle, nor at the end. And I think Bernal Diaz's account is a lot more truthful. It's also a real rip-roaring adventure tale of landing on the coast and carving out a kingdom among native tribesmen that genuinely happened. So, extraordinary event in history. This is the best first-hand account of it. Highly recommended. This piece of paper is to remind me to talk about some books that I listened to on audiobook rather than read. Incidentally, yeah, I should say, I read this one. I'm currently reading Bernal Diaz. I'm about a little bit over a third of the way through. So I've still got some to go on there. I'm going to talk about this book, Maya Lord by John Co. Robbins. It's a historical novel that covers a fascinating story of two guys. One guy called Jerome Aguilar, who also turns up in Bernal Diaz because he's their translator. He's shipwrecked on the Mayan coast, and his abilities to translate from Spanish to Yucatec Mayan is crucial in establishing contact with local tribes for Cortes. Him and another person called Malinche, who was a local who could translate between Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, and Yucatec Mayan. She also was seen sold into slavery, called Malinche, and Doña Marina, they call her in Spanish. In any case, the Mayans sacrificed, and the other guy who was with Jerome Aguilar, he's called Gonzalo Guerrero, and My Lord really covers his story as well. So Jerome Aguilar is more historically significant, but Gonzalo Guerrero has an amazing story as well. They're shipwrecked together on the Mayan coast, kidnapped by the Mayans. Jerome Aguilar keeps the faith, says his prayers daily. He never integrates to Mayan society and is always an outcast. So when Cortes comes and his countrymen save him, he's over the moon. Gonzalo Guerrero, the opposite. He arrives in Mayan lands and he assimilates into the local culture. And as a powerful man, he becomes a war chief, and he has a Mayan wife and who is related to one of the local chiefs. So he becomes a Mayan elite and later fights against the Spanish, the conquistadors, when they invade. Such is the extent to which he's gone native. Movingly, Jerome, when Cortes arrives, Jerome asks his friend Gonzalo Guerrero, who he was shipwrecked with, to come back to his countrymen, my brother in Christ. And Gonzalo Guerrero says, I can't. I've got tattoos on my face. I've got holes in my ears. My countrymen wouldn't take me anymore. I'm Mayan. So that's an extraordinary journey for these two men. The book itself, I will say, is rather let down by the audiobook. I feel mean saying this, but it's read by the author, and he sounds as if he's very bored with his own work. Um, so it's not that I want to talk, but it's not a very engaging voice acting performance. It is let down somewhat by that. Maybe better to read because it is a great story. And again, all true. The next one I've got down on my list of audiobooks is Servant of the Underworld by Alette de Bodard, a French author. It's a fantasy set in an Aztec society where the Aztec gods are real and the Aztec sort of mythos is all important. Honestly, not recommended. I also have issues with the way it treats the Aztec mythos. So I don't think it's a good representation either of Aztec society or even of the Aztec mythos. Um, so yeah, personally, I'm not a fan, wouldn't recommend. Maya to Aztec, Ancient Mesoamerica Revealed, from by Edwin Barnhart. Apparently, this is a great Courses Plus thing. I bought it on Audible. I just searched for Mesoamerica, bought some books. It's interesting. It's quite dry. It'll cover, the Mayan mathematics and the astronomy that they were capable of, zenith passage and that sort of thing. I again, I would say it's quite dry. Personally, not recommended. So those are all the audiobooks. This book takes a bit of work, but is absolutely worth it if you've the patience. 15 Poets of the Aztec World by Miguel Leon Portilla. I assume that's how you pronounce this name, like Portilla. But the Spanish, generally that double L is a Y, so Portilla. It not only contains the poetry of various famous Aztec poets, which was transcribed after the conquest, because there was no written form of the Nahuatl language, but they had an oral tradition of song, and we can tell that these songs are sort of genuine because when they were written down, we have multiple copies of some of the songs, which are very close, so we can see that it's not just something that someone has made up. There's several copies showing that it was a song that was sung at the time. This book contains not only the poems, but also a little bit of the history of who this person was, and what their personal circumstances were. That gives you an insight into their character. So yeah, this is highly recommended. You'll learn a lot about Aztec society and Aztec nobles, and the poems themselves are wonderful. I will say it took me two goes, but I have now read all of this, and that one I do recommend. This book, Demon of the Air by Simon Levac, it is a fantasy, well, a historical novel. So there's not really magic in it. There's a bit of, prophecy kind of, but you never really know if the prophecies are real or if they're just sort of coming true accidentally. Or even if they will come true at all for a lot of the book. So aside from some prophetic foreshadowing that's used, it doesn't contain magic or anything, and it is set before the conquest in an Aztec society. So there's a lot of details of Aztec society. There's a set piece, there's a Tlachtli match, the ball game that they would play, and that sort of thing. I don't think it's great, if I'm honest. I'm not a big fan, and because I wasn't a big fan of this book, I have to say I also bought the sequel, but I didn't bother to read it. So that's that. 1493, moving on. This is non-fiction again. So this is really a companion volume. We'll start with this one, 1491. So 1491 is the year before 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. 1492 is the year Columbus sailed. 1491 covers America before Columbus. So it talks about how many native people there were. It's hard to estimate those sort of things these days. The native societies that there were in the North America, Mesoamerica, and further south, including the Incas, are discussed. And it talks about the geography of the region and in what time periods it came to be settled, and the academic arguments around that. I think that sounded quite dry, but actually it's very well written, and it's absolutely fascinating. And the variety of different civilizations is really striking. Some of them are very warlike, some of them are remarkably peaceful, especially down south in the Andes. these are so there were only a certain number of cradles of civilization, different areas where civilization could arise. You needed agriculture and you needed a core crop. And maize drove Mesoamerican civilization, and potatoes drove Aztec civilization. So these are unique human civilizations that arose without any contact with the civilizations that we're now more familiar with, that came out of the Euphrates and Tigris. So highly recommended. And then 1493 is the slightly larger companion volume. And this one also is excellent. It covers the impact of what we now call the Columbian Exchange, the exchange of ideas, of viruses, of domesticated animals and species, and cultural exchange that occurred between Europe and the Americas after Columbus sailed. As we know, this cultural exchange, particularly the viruses and Western diseases, Westerners had many more domesticated animals, there being more space in Eurasia, and there were more candidates for domesticity, I think. And it seems that zoonotic diseases that came from these animals, just by happenstance, sort of were much, much more common in Europe. So they absolutely decimated native populations. So that's obviously a huge impact. And then the impact that maize, the impact of rubber. There's there's a lot of things that come from the New World that you wouldn't necessarily have thought. So before Columbus sailed, there was no rubber in Europe. Rubber comes from Brazil. Chilies. So before Columbus sailed, Chinese and Indian cuisine had no chilies. It wasn't hot. Chilies were domesticated. And I always think, why didn't we, the British, or the Spanish, why didn't European cultures that brought chilies back to Europe, and for the first time, why didn't we sort of develop hot food? We could have done it. We could have had traditional British curries, but we just don't. I don't know why. I find that very bizarre. Of course, the Irish took to potatoes in a big way. Kind of our fault a little bit, as the British staff shouldn't laugh about it too hard. It's a fascinating book, and highly recommended. The impact of the Columbian Exchange still going on today. These books are more like geography, I would say. They're non-fiction, and they don't cover the cultural aspect so much. But yeah, the geography. A book that does cover the culture, and my star pupil, the best book about Aztec society and civilization. If you read only one book on the Aztec Empire, it should be this, Fifth Son by Camilla Townsend. Cannot recommend strongly enough. It has an excellent summary of how the Aztecs came to be in the Central Valley of Mexico, how they came to dominate the valley militarily and culturally, the form of their empire, which was more of a hegemony than an empire that we would imagine, an empire that exerted direct control over the regions. And then it talks about the conquest and the period just after the conquest. It's very thorough, it's very well researched, it's very well written, and it will really give you a good understanding of Aztec society. If you read only one book, it should be this one. On this list anyway. Aztec by Gary Jennings. This is a historical novel, so it follows a guy who's just made up called Cloud Mixley. Mixed anyway, and he is mostly a traveling merchant. So conveniently, he travels around Mesoamerica, visiting all of the different groups, and talking about the local sort of culture and how he interacts with them. So it'll talk you through, you'll meet the Raramuri, running people in the north of Mexico, who are very different from the Chichimecs, the sort of barbarian people who lived out in the desert and the arid lands. And then the Mayans who lived further east. He'll meet all of these groups. And then later he does work for Montezuma and become a spy and get and have some contact with the European invaders when we arrive. Indeed, the framing device is that he's sort of being interrogated, and his life story is being sent back to King Carlos in Spain, who's just curious to know what life was like for the Aztec people before the Christians arrived. In any case, I've got to say, it's quite a long read and it's quite tough going. So I wouldn't really recommend it. Certainly, it's well researched, and you will learn a lot about local Mesoamerican cultures and the subtle cultural differences between them and what that society was like. Um, Even so, I would probably give this one a miss. The Art of Mesoamerica. This is let's actually take some of these down. This is more of a reference book that just shows you some of the different art styles so this isn't a book that you would read really. Um, I not recommended. An Aztec Herbal. This is a translation of a book from 1552 of Aztec herbal remedies and shamanistic practices. There's quite a bit of sacrifice three swallows, and then I could it. I find this book it's sort of funny, I guess, and also there's a little bit of dark humor in there too. Uh, Reading the recipes is sort of hard and bizarre and just yeah. I'll read one afterwards. At the same time, the so there'll be a cure for pain during childbirth, and you've got to feel for the woman who's lying there, giving birth while the midwife is frantically grinding up three swallows and adding lizard's blood, which is the sort of thing that you get in here. And you just know, yeah, it does make you feel sorry for what people went through back in the day. Um, Right, so this is the real stuff. History and mythology of the Aztecs. Codex Chimalpopoca. Chimalpopoca means smoking shield. Chimal shield, Popoca smoking. Um, this is a translation of a Nahuatl history. So this is an indigenous account that has been translated. It's quite heavy going, and in many places it reads a bit like Numbers or Kings from the Bible, if you know what that is. So I could I'll read a little bit for you later, but this is for really for academic interest only. Yeah, and not a fun read. Probably give it a miss. Um, a short account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolomé de las Casas. It is a short account, and so it should be quite an easy read, but I found it a very difficult read because it describes the crimes and behavior of the conquistadors as they rampaged through Latin America. Bartolomé de las Casas was originally he was originally a conquistador himself. He had an encomienda. He had Indian servants in Cuba, um, but he then sort of realized that what they were doing was wrong, and became a very holy and religious man. He was appointed bishop in Chiapas, in Mexico, and served as the protector of the Indians, because he became so known for advocacy on their behalf. As protector of the Indians, he was working based in Madrid, lobbying the king and on Indian affairs. And at that time, if there were any native group that had any complaints with the Spanish administration from Chile up as far as to Mexico, and including Cuba and the Caribbean, any native group in there, any complaints went to Bartolome de las Casas. It was his job to look after native people on the entire continent. So yeah, a big job, and you might say he didn't do a great job, but he tried his best, and he really understood. His writings about how horrific everything were became it's amazing, I think, that they were printed at the time because they're so critical of the Spanish and what they had done in the New World. Um, and it became the sort of source of it was immediately seized upon by all of Spain's enemies, the English, the French, all the rest of Europe, and shown as an example of how awful the Spanish were. The king, to be fair, did try and do something about it. He passed the new laws, which did improve the situation for the Indians, but The thing is that it was very hard to enforce them, firstly, and secondly, there was nothing that could be done about the diseases. Even in areas where there were no, where Indians weren't exploited, and there were areas like this, Tlaxcala, a small state that allied with Cortes and had extra rights after the conquest as a result of that early alliance with Cortes, springs to mind. Even in areas like that, where the Indians weren't, you know, brutally exploited, well, not quite so much, they still had mortality rates of over 90% from European diseases. So yeah, there wasn't all the Spanish's fault, but this is a really hard read. This is not a pleasant read. So if you can stomach it, bit of world history. Codex Chimalpahin, similar to Codex Chimalpopoca. Chimalpahin means runs with shield. Aztecs have a bit of a you know, this book as well will describe lineages and calendars, and it is more for academic interest than I wouldn't attempt that one for fun. The Codex Borgia. So this is a copy. There are very few original. The Aztecs had a sort of halfway to writing system. They had a pictogram systems, and this book is a reconstruction of one of the few codices, one of the few original Aztec books that survived. They call them a matl. In fact, you can still get a matl paper, the sort of paper that the Aztecs made, that they make from a maguey plant, a sort of cactus. Anyway, this would have been used by priests for divination. It contains a lot of calendars. There's also text that explains what all of these images mean. Some of them describe rituals. Many of them are calendars. So to give you a little example, yeah, this is. All of these are day signs. There are 13 day signs, and they're arranged in these blocks. So the days are proceeding along this way. Actually, when you get to here, they go on to the next page, because the Amatl books were folded up concertina fashion, so you could unfurl the whole thing. So a lot of the time when it's been reproduced in a book, you have to bear in mind that when you look at 2 pages, they're actually part of a larger image that goes over several other pages and several pages before. The Codex Borgia was sort of sent back as a little memento, like a sort of postcard by a conquistador to their sponsors in Spain. The rich family who received it in Spain had no real interest in it. They gave it to their servants, who gave it to their children to play with, because it was just like a colourful thing. And the children were playing with it and burnt it. So there are some burn marks on this. In some of the pages, I'll show you what that looks like. This, I should say, is a coloured reconstruction. The original is very faded. The original, so here, for instance, this missing section here is where a part of it was burnt out by the servants by the children of the servants of the rich family who bought this. Or came to acquire it, really. They didn't buy it. It was just sent to them. They did realize a little bit later, one of the Borgia family, actually, who are a famous Spanish family, because Pope Gregory was a Borgia, and Cesare Borgia is the sort of really the protagonist of The Prince by Machiavelli. So the Borgia family are very famous, very active in Italian politics at that time. They acquired this and put it in the Vatican Library to preserve it, which is where it is today. There are not many indigenous pre-conquest books that survive. It is an interesting read. I've got to say, it's if you want to understand Aztec religion, then this is the sort of thing that you need to read. But it's not an easy read. You'll have a much better time with Fifth Son. So yeah, not really recommended, if I'm honest. And finally, is that the last one? Oh yeah, last one. The Florentine Codex. So This book, confession time. I've not read this one. I've looked at it a little bit, but I haven't read this one. The others I've generally read, unless I said that I hadn't. The Florentine Codex is there was oh, I'm not sure if it's Dominican or Franciscan. I think he's a Dominican monk. There's a monk who was in Mexico City shortly after the conquest called Sahagun, and he did the early ethnographic work. He wrote about Aztec society and collected details of Aztec culture from the people he worked with, who he was bringing up to be Christians and teaching Spanish things. So he wrote an encyclopedia of the Noah world that describes their customs. Um, uh, Again, I think I can't really comment too much on how readable this is. Um, this is this particular thing is not exactly a reconstruction of it. Again, it's a reconstruction of the Florentine Codex with a commentary. Um, I don't think I'm confident to review that. So, of these various books, again, the most of these probably not worth reading. Um, the if you only read one, it should be The Fifth Son, though. So this is best in class. Uh, yeah, I guess that's it.